Is my employee lying about needing bereavement leave?
AAM. Is my employee lying about needing bereavement leave? 201,603. Mood spoilers. Corporate rules are perplexing. Less Than by Allison Green on March 28, 2016. Reminder. I am not the OOP. A reader writes, our company's bereavement policy is pretty standard. For immediate family, parent, sibling, child, spouse, we have 3 days from time of passing to the funeral service, and 1 day of bereavement for non-immediate family, grandparent, aunt, uncle.
I've had to use it once myself and had no issues. When I returned, my director asked for an obituary. I sent him a link to the online obituary and no further questions were asked. In another case, a relative was not deemed as being eligible for bereavement time, and I was told that I would need to use PTO time for the absence. Now, I am a supervisor of my department of about 20 people. I've had to apply for bereavement time for 2 employees since taking over, and it was as simple as my own experience. Both were 1-day leaves, and they got the obituary to me as soon as they returned. About a month ago, an employee, Jane, came to me to say that her stepfather was in hospice and asked what our leave policy was.
I confirmed with HR that a stepfather was eligible for the same amount of leave as a parent. I felt odd about asking, but I wanted to make sure that I understood the policy. I forwarded the information to Jane, including letting her know my own experience of getting the link to the obituary to my boss. On a Thursday night, I got a text from Jane saying that her stepfather only had a few hours to live and that she was going to be with him. I gave her my condolences and asked her to stay in touch so that I would know how to schedule around her absence. My next communication from Jane was Monday morning after the start of her shift. She said that her stepfather has passed over the weekend and the service was the next day, so she would be back on Wednesday. Again, I gave her my condolences and assured her that we'd cover her work for her.
While she was gone on Tuesday, payroll asked me for a copy of the obituary since I had put in for her bereavement time to have started on Friday. I told them that I didn't have it yet, but I'm sure that I would get it from Jane when she came in the next day. To try to confirm this, I sent a text to Jane which went unanswered. I wasn't too worried about this since she was at a funeral after all. The next day, Jane returned and was rather flustered when I asked her for a copy of the obituary. I apologized and told her that I wasn't trying to make her upset but that payroll needed it in order to pay her for the days she had been out. By the end of the day, she had forwarded me an email from a secretary at the funeral home that stated, "We apologize that the obituary is not ready. Please find the attached note to certify that Jane Smith was at our location."
The attached note looked like a doctor's excuse note and stated that Jane had been at their location on Friday, Monday, and Tuesday regarding Mr. Jones' arrangements. I forwarded this to payroll and figured that the case was closed. Payroll contacted me the next day to say that the note was fine to certify the dates of services, but still needed something that proved the date of passing, not on the note, as well as her relationship to the deceased. After checking the funeral home's website to see if the obituary had been posted yet, I mentioned to Jane what payroll had said about the note. Jane was immediately defensive and then let it slip that he hadn't died until Saturday. I told her that if he hadn't died until Saturday, then Friday would not be counted as bereavement time since we only cover from the time of passing to the service. She was upset and said, "I don't know why you can't just take that note I already gave you. How was I supposed to know that he wasn't going to die until Saturday?" I was a little taken aback by this. I also had to take time off so that I could be with a loved one during their final hours, and I counted that as well worth the PTO time spent. I suggested to Jane that she contact the funeral home again to see about the obituary or if they could provide any other documents relating to time of passing. I also went to see my director because I felt like I was getting in over my head. I should mention at this point that Jane and my director don't get along. We've had multiple issues with absenteeism with her. We accrue PTO time by number of hours worked. And it seems like whenever she has 8 hours saved up, she uses them right away even though I warn her against it. She had just enough time for one day at the time this happened. She's also been caught in several ethical dilemmas, and was almost fired this fall when she was caught cheating on an aptitude test for a possible promotion. HR only decided to keep her because I had not specifically told her that she should not get help from others in that department on the test afterwards. Jane went to HR and said that my director had said a lot of hurtful and inflammatory things about her. I don't know if it was true since I was on vacation at the time, but my director got in hot water. So, I went to see my director about the missing obituary problem and the problem of the dates. He immediately erupts that she's obviously lying and playing me for a fool. Why wouldn't a funeral home print an obituary before a funeral, he demanded. Now I am feeling incredibly sheepish and uncertain. There is a part of me that does not want to believe that someone would lie about something as important as this. That same part feels incredibly sick about having to question someone about this. Another part of me just feels like I'm an idiot and she's been playing me the whole time. Now Jane has sent me a link to the county's vital records sites that shows a death certificate with date of passing is being processed under the name that she has provided. I forwarded this down to payroll, but they have stated that this still doesn't prove her relationship to the deceased, especially since neither she nor her mother share the same last name as the deceased. I can think of multiple reasons for this in the modern age, but none that help here. Payroll is willing to wait until Monday for an obituary. What do I do? Should I contact the funeral home myself? I feel like I have bungled this terribly, but I'm not sure what I should have done differently. Am I just letting my own personal experience with loss get in the way? Allison's response is at the link on top. Update 201,612. Remember the letterwriter wondering if her already untrustworthy employee was lying about leaving bereavement leave? Here's the update. I really want to thank you in the comments section on this one. I kind of took a beating in the comments, but I think that it made me realize that I was failing at being an advocate for my employee and thus failing at a vital component of my job, and as a compassionate human. A couple of things that I want to mention that might add some insight. 1. I work for a company that has a lot of union employees. While the employees in my department are not union, we are held to most of the same standards as the union employees when it comes to things like PTO, accrual and time off. The requirement of documentation wasn't my rule, director's rule, or even a prickly HR person's rule. It's something that's specified in the union contract, so all employees for the company are held to it. I agree with most of the comments that it is unnecessary, but I don't have the authority to get anyone to budge on it. 2. The Friday that all of this started, I had to leave work suddenly due to having a miscarriage. I should have taken more time off afterwards than just the weekend. I was an emotional and hormonal wreck. I had a million reasons that in my mind seemed to make sense for going into work. I think the only reason that I don't beat myself up for not taking time off right then is knowing that Jane would have had to deal with director on her own and that it would have turned out much worse. More on that below. 3. Director is well known for being a bully, and 2 for holding grudges. I'm usually pretty good at standing up to him, and we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. He's had more than one person storm out on him and quit. I feel pretty guilty that, at the time, I let my own judgment be swayed and panicked. Anyway, after reading the comments, I picked up the banner of advocate and tried to see how I could help Jane in getting this resolved and get her paid. This is when things got really messed up as far as the company is concerned. I went through payroll, HR, and even corporate HR. Every time, I got the same answer. Rules are rules. Then I started trying to find what other forms of documentation they would accept. They told me that they could accept the online link to vital records in lieu of a death certificate. But that still didn't prove that they were related. They asked for a copy of her mother's marriage certificate. Jane got a copy of the marriage license. But because Jane has been married, divorced, and remarried, her name didn't match her mother's last name. Payroll then asked for Jane's most recent marriage certificate and a copy of her birth certificate. I'm not kidding. Jane could easily access her marriage certificate but had no idea where her birth certificate was, as she had just moved. I tried escalating this further to the VP of Human Resources. No luck. While Jane was trying to figure out how to get a new copy of her birth certificate, her sister discovered that the funeral home had never created the obituary because the family had forgotten to check a box on the forms within hours. We were holding an obituary. I delivered it personally to the head of payroll, and they made sure the payment was on her check. So, this has a somewhat happy ending but not without a lot of work and headache. Throughout the whole ordeal, I continued to apologize to Jane for the way that this was being handled and promise her that I was trying to escalate this to the highest level. I think that we reached a place of mutual understanding that this was not okay and that the company is wrong in making someone jump through this many hoops at a time that they are grieving. So after much ado, it worked out. But I can honestly say that going forward I will advocate for my employees from the very beginning. I take absolute responsibility for it going the wrong direction at the start of this fiasco. And 30 years from now, both Oop and that woman are going to remember just how much worse their company made everything. It's not the requirement, it's the way the requirement was carried out. Oop needs a long break. She mentioned having a miscarriage around that time and then having to deal with all this. Hell no. I hope she finds a better work environment. When my mom died suddenly, I left work and didn't return for a week. Got back to find my department's admin assistant had left my leave card on my desk, with 2 days leave deducted from my total. I queried it and was told bereavement leave was only 3 days, so I'd have to take the rest as personal leave. This didn't seem right, so I checked and lo and behold, it was wrong. I was entitled to 5 days. I emailed HR to check and then forwarded the response to the assistant with a request to return my 2 days. She got really offended, moaned about how I didn't trust her, how I shouldn't have gone behind her back, and that she wasn't sure she'd ever feel comfortable around me again. I bet she felt a lot less comfortable in general after I complained to my manager and hers. Bereavement leave is just PTO hours at my job, less than. I know I may only be taking into account my work experience in Europe, but this sounds like a horrible place to work. Can't imagine only being able to take a day or a couple of days for something like this, and then being hounded for some paperwork that could just be forwarded by the end of the month. It seems cruel and inhumane. JFCI would leave that company in a heartbeat. What an evil thing to do. To badger people about the paperwork and nuances of when exactly a loved one passed and how exactly you're related to them. I have friends I would grieve deeply for, while for my father I would be pissed that it didn't happen sooner. Also, Jane was right to snap back that, of course, she wouldn't know her stepfather would take so long to pass. And the manager talking about PTO well spent on pre-bereavement leave, no. Fuck no. The more I think about this stupid company's policies, the more pissed off I get. Rare L for Allison. Absolute trash take by her. So a union shop makes it a requirement to jump through 45 hoops to be entitled to 3 days of bereavement? I've had some ridiculous experiences with bereavement leave. But at this company, if your spouse or child dies, you get 3 days? Absolutely evil. This is absolutely draconic. I'm in the UK. Pre-COVID. Worked with a guy who took a couple of days off because his grandmother died. No issues. All approved. Really sorry for your loss. Then, his other grandmother died about a week later. Again. Bereavement approved. No issues. A week later, Grandpa died. A week after that, his uncle, then an aunt, then another uncle, then a stepdad, then the other grandpa. At this point, people higher up were getting suspicious. And he was told he couldn't have any more bereavement time without proof. Dude marched in with obituaries and funeral booklets for every single person. His family had just been really unlucky. He also quit, and left the whole department in the lurch. As he was the only one who knew how to use some of the systems, none of us could blame him. Really. Since then, the company has required some kind of proof of a funeral if you want the day off. Hey, I know your father figure just died. But I'm an asshole, so instead of grieving, I need you to jump through a ton of unnecessary hoops to ensure his passing is as traumatic as possible. Okay? Quote. Fucking name and shame. It seems like whenever she has 8 hours saved up, she uses them right away, even though I warn her against it. She's also been caught in several ethical dilemmas, and was almost fired this fall when she was caught cheating on an aptitude test for a possible promotion. HR only decided to keep her because I had not specifically told her that she should not get help from others in that department on the test. Translation. An adult woman is on thin ice because she takes time whenever she wants, and because she didn't automatically assume she had to avoid academic dishonesty on an aptitude test. Working at offices usually means looking up answers to do your job in the best way. Unless we need to find out whether you're an ENFP or INFP. This is absolutely disgusting behavior and a disgusting protocol. The only thing that would have been worse is if another employee wouldn't have had to jump through these hoops. My first job was selective about who was asked for a death certificate. Never a need for obituary because not everyone who lost a loved one had one. One man was asked while at the airport headed to his father's funeral after phoning in. When my mom died, I was given no hassles and nothing but condolences. The first guy ended up quitting when he learned I got different treatment. I left not long after. My mom died very unexpectedly while I was a temp. There had been some unrelated issues, so I was looking for a new position and knew they were looking for a replacement for me. The day after she died, I called in to let them know I'd need a few days. My immediate supervisor was very supportive. Later I get a call from my supervisor letting me know that the higher-ups had found my replacement and decided to just let me go as of that morning, and I needed to come get my stuff as soon as possible so it wasn't in the way for the new employee. I couldn't believe it. My supervisor obviously felt terrible, but I wasn't really in a state to remember not to shoot the messenger. It was years ago, but I have never and will never forgive the people that made the decision to fire me the day after my mom died. Glad it got sorted, but 3 days for a child? Really? Jesus wept. When my brother in the UK was killed, my boss in NZ took me to the travel agent that morning and booked me on the first available flight back home. He paid for it. My aunt gave me the lump sum of money to pay him back when I returned to NZ. After a month away, he looked at it and said I could use it myself and drip feed what I owed back to him. He only took it in the end because I told him if I didn't give it to him, my aunt would be over to sort things out, and she was not the kind of lady you'd want to disobey law. My boss was a total legend. This RC company, on the other hand, Well, let's just say I hope they get what's coming to them. People can't believe it when I tell them about the documentation and inflexibility of bigger businesses. One where every aspect of being human has been removed. Where an employee is a liability. Someone who needs to be documented to death. It's exhausting advocating for yourself under these circumstances. I feel like a death certificate would solve literally all these problems. The bizarre thing about the union argument is that typically companies refuse to go above and beyond anything in the CBA as a way to argue to other employees that they lose out on flexibility by joining the union. Totally bizarre to then just do the same thing with non-bargaining employees.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Eracast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.